My dad would call his voicemail. Thank you for calling Brian Broderick. Today is, he would say the date. Hope you have a great day. Every day he would call and change the voicemail so people knew that that was a custom voicemail that he recorded that day. And he did it for decades.
I'm always super fascinated by the idea of why people are the way they are.
When I was 3, Mom and Dad divorced. We moved to Alaska when I'm 3. He's 18 months. My mom is hustling to try to create a life for us. My first real job, like W-2, was working at Best Buy. And I always leaned tech.
Who was Mike Wolber before the career?
Mike Wolber, Chief Sales Officer at Apartment List, combines tech sales leadership with creative roots from Nike. With over a decade in multifamily and 2 successful acquisitions, he's a proven growth driver passionate about marketing and storytelling.
A third of my life, 8 hours of every waking day, had gone into this game. I believe that consistency compounds.
If you have that evidence, then you start believing that you can do things.
And it was the first time I realized that if I apply myself to something, great things can happen. And I would say,
Mr. Mike Wolber, welcome to the show.
we're here, man. I'm fired up. Can't wait.
I'm stoked. This has been a long time coming.
It has.
So let's start with, what was your childhood like? Who was Mike Wolber before the career?
My childhood was probably more different than a lot of people would guess or believe. Was born in Tulsa. Quickly moved to Cincinnati, Ohio. That's where the whole Wolber side of my family is from. When I was 3, Mom and Dad divorced, and so moved to Alaska, which is where my mom's whole family was. She was always in the oil kind of industry, so toggling back and forth from Tulsa to Alaska. But I spent the bulk of my life from 3 to 18 up in Alaska, did absolutely everything you can imagine that is Alaska. And ultimately, after my childhood, decided that I wanted to live a life in the lower 48, but happy to go anywhere you want in terms of Alaska. That's
awesome. Well, yeah, tell me about Alaska. Is a very, I only know one person in my life outside of you that lived in Alaska. What was that like?
So when I'm 3, we moved to Alaska, me and my younger brother. He's about 18 months younger than I am. And my mom...
Is there competitiveness between the two of you?
There was for a minute. I have thrown a rock at his face before. There's definitely been classic brother. I was best man speech at his wedding a few months back in June and told everyone that, there was a 4 or 5 year chapter there where it would be, hey, Caleb, you want to fight? And we would just literally start fighting. But you know how it gets, the older you get, the closer you get in age. And at this point, absolutely best buds, think super, super highly of Caleb. Best guy I know, and that competitive nature we had is now just total camaraderie.
That's awesome.
We moved to Alaska when I'm 3. He's 18 months. My mom is hustling to try to create a life for us, and my mom gets a front desk kind of role at a real estate office. And pretty early on, she meets this handsome devil named Brian Broderick. That is now my dad. My dad and mom dated for quite some time. Obviously, there were 2 boys in the picture, which was important to make sure that there was a slow and steady introduction. And when I was 6, they got married. So it was really, really cool for me because early on, I felt like my father chose me, which sort of gave me this safety net, both with mom and with dad. And the way that my dad grew up, happy to dig into it, grew up quite poor in the state of Alaska and found a ton of success through real estate. He has been the #1 broker in residential for about 30 years in a row up in the state. So I kind of watched someone go from, nothing to a lot. The way he grew up made him really feel like he had to earn the food on his plate. So you think about doing Alaska, did a lot of Alaska, whether it was hunting and fishing based on how he grew up. He raised us the same way.
That's incredible. Would you say that because he has been so successful in real estate, that inspired you to get into real estate?
To a degree. My wife and I were actually talking about this last night. When would be okay with the kids having a boyfriend or a girlfriend? And my rules are real simple. You got to be able to drive and you've got to be able to pay. Really independent pretty early on, trying to start landscaping businesses to get cash. Or my first real job, W-2, was working at Best Buy. And I always leaned tech. I was born in the late 80s and always enjoyed the kind of computer hardware. Building computers was my first side hustle, just as an example. So I always leaned tech. But having a dad who worked hard, was certainly in sales and real estate, I feel super privileged to have been able to kind of create a career that now sits at the intersection of tech and real estate, because there's a personal passion, which is technology, but this lifeline, which has been real estate for almost my whole life. So being at the intersection remains a really cool energizer for me.
So if we can rewind a little bit, what do you feel like? I'm always super fascinated by the idea of why people are the way they are, right? Like whether it's nurture, whether it's nature, what they've learned from their parents, either through the good things that they've done or the bad things. Like what would you say you learned from your parents, both good and bad, if you're willing to chat about that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think there are like a couple different, probably like lifestyle things that are now normal for me that were definitely a combination of nature and nurture. Growing up, my dad always made time for fitness, and oftentimes did it when it was convenient for the family. So that was like early morning wake ups or getting it in when it made sense to family, so he wouldn't miss the things that were important, whether it was sports or whatever it might be. And watching that always be a priority is certainly like now something I try to bring to work, but also to family, because personal health is super important to me. We share that in common. Secondly, like I watched my dad always answer the phone, and it was 5 p.m. We're walking to dinner in Hawaii, and a client's calling. My dad's taking that call. And there was this like always on mentality that at times was hard as a kid, because like you're jockeying for attention and there was an important thing. But I watched what it looked like to like outwork and to always do the thing that resulted in this like really great life for me and my family, that I'm now fortunate to be providing the exact same type of experience for my family. So there's definitely like an outwork type mentality. And then like the third thing, if I reflect back on our morning commutes, my dad never had to travel for work like I do today. So he always drove us to school in the morning. Every single morning that I can remember, my dad would call his voicemail to leave a custom message. And, you know, he would say, "Thank you for calling Brian Broderick. Today is," he would say the date, "Hope you have a great day." And he did that every single day. Every day he would call and change the voicemail so people knew that that was a custom voicemail that he recorded that day. And he did it for decades. And you just think about like the discipline of doing like things like that are not scalable at all, and what that probably did to impact loyalty and customer satisfaction. I definitely learned a lot about just doing things that are unscalable, but also being disciplined. If you're going to do something, do it.
That's incredible. That reminds me of one of our customers and folks that people know, ZRS, Jeremy, and the team. The way they organize their event is just phenomenal, because they pay attention to the smallest of details, where, you know, sometimes I'm like, why? I don't know if I would like think about that problem so hard, but the amount of conversation, the amount of respect that people get when you're just like focusing maniacally on the smallest things really goes a long way.
Totally.
What do you think inspired your dad to like come up with that concept? Did he like just come up with it himself? Did he hear it from somebody?
I have a belief that like, you know, you get creative by consuming creative. And I have to assume there was something at some point in time that a mentor or someone taught him about customer service or sales process for us, like the ABCs of selling, things like that. So part of me has to believe there's like a mentor story or an inspiration story. But I also think one of the cool things about real estate, and I believe it's similar now that we can build in public on LinkedIn and our last name follows us wherever we go, is that in real estate, your last name is the brand. It doesn't matter if you're selling for Jack White or for Prudential or for whatever the local brokerage might be. People are either going to or not going to trust Shiv. And I think it was the same thing for my dad. Brian Broderick, to him, was the brand. So I think he took that really personally in how he showed up. You know, if he said yes, he was always going to be there. If he was going to be there, he was often early. And I think there's like something to be said about that, which is just making sure that you take it personal when it comes to work and that you effort a single day when it comes to work as well. And those are two things I definitely watched my dad do specifically.
Something I've always admired about you, having known you, you know, over the last few years, is how incredibly consistent you are with things, right? And I think this has been a hard lesson for me to learn over the last decade of my life. Is I started off trying to be somebody who was super intense, which I still am, but I was always like, I'm going to go full on this. And what ended up happening was, in some ways still happens, is I kind of yo-yo, right? It's like, I'm going to like post all these things like this week. And over the years, I think what I've learned is the intensity is really consistency, right? The hard thing to do is to do the thing every day, week over week, month over month, year over year. How do you feel like you've cultivated that ability to be disciplined and consistent in your LinkedIn posts, in your fitness routine, what are like the mental models or like hacks that, or maybe not hacks, but how do you do that?
Yeah, can I tell a like personal story to answer
Absolutely.
it? So I believe that consistency compounds, but without consistency, you never make the progress you want to. And I think a lot of times people spend their time thinking short term versus long term. And I firmly believe that like long term outcomes are how you get to where you really want to get, whether it's your career, your personal life, whatever it might be. It's 2008. I'm a junior in college, entering my senior year, and I always struggled with weight. I was always heavy. Once I got into like high school, it was just always like, whether it's I loved carbs or whatever it might be, I just like always struggled with my weight. And it happened at some point in time. You know, it's just started being a struggle at some point in high school. So it's 2008. I weigh about 255, maybe 260 pounds. And I was playing this video game called World of Warcraft pretty addictively. And like we can come back to like that like mentality I've always had, which is like all in or all out. But I had built a custom gaming computer that was probably worth about 10 grand. I was ranked probably around 50 to 75th globally out of a few million players in World of Warcraft, which sounds awesome, but it's actually pretty crappy. And there was this command you could do in the game, I don't know if it still exists, which is /played. /played, I did it on my 3-year anniversary of playing the game, and I had played 365 days worth of time over the last 3 years. A third of my life, 8 hours of every waking day had gone into this game. And it was just this like really rude awakening. So being the aggressive, like all-in person I am, I threw away the gaming computer. I deleted the account. I probably could have monetized that account in hindsight, and I probably could have made a lot of money with that gaming machine. I bought a book called Body for Life, and it just kind of talked about this like recipe of consistency. So committed to it for 3 months with one buddy. His name's Adrian. And for 3 months, we did it 6 days a week of training and eating, and then Sunday was kind of a day of rest, kind of a cheat day, which I don't really believe in that mentality anymore. And I lost about 45 pounds that summer. And I saw it in the mirror. I saw it when I showed up for my senior year and people seeing this different. And it was the first time I like realized that if I apply myself to something all in, that like great things can happen. And I would say in 2008, it was like the first meaningful inflection point in my adult life. And since then, like the habits of success have been critical to me, whether it's how I show up at work, my daily non-negotiables, but it all started back in 2008.
It's so funny you bring that up because in 2008, I also lost a ton of weight. I as well was a fat kid growing up. I remember my brother, I was playing, I played football like when I was in 5th grade and 6th grade and 4th grade. And when you're a kid, the way they do the teams is based on weight. It's not based on age. And because I've always been a super tall kid and I was fat, I would get placed in the like age class where the weight class where I was playing with like 15-year-olds, 14-year-olds. I was this like 9, 10-year-old kid, like competing with these kids, and it was just so intimidating. And I remember when we had to do the weigh-ins, my brother was there and my mom was there, and I stepped on the scale and it was 157, right? This was like me at like 8 or 9 or I don't even know. My brother took that number and like harassed me for like months and years. And when I was 12, I moved to India and I ended up getting into badminton for some reason and started playing a ton of badminton. And over that summer, also lost a ton of weight. And very similarly to you, like use that as just a story that I can like use to like then motivate myself for other things, right? Totally. And I was listening to the Modern Wisdom podcast, and Chris Williamson talks about how self-belief is really a series of indisputable truths that you tell yourself, right? Like you have to build an undeniable stack of evidence that you can do what you say you can do. And if you have that evidence, then you start believing that you can do things. Yep. So crazy that we both had that
is wild.
Life-changing experience in 2008. That's exactly when it happened for me as well.
That's wild.
Awesome. So we talked about fitness. I feel like consistency is challenging. I am a very routine-oriented person, as I imagine you are. And in order to build consistency, I find that you have to like design your environment and your life to enable that. What is your like routine like? What does a Mike Wolber morning to night look like?
It's funny. I actually like drafted a LinkedIn post this morning and I deleted it because I think it like just got over the line of like sounding cocky, and I really try to find the right voice of like confidence versus arrogance, because I was going to like author like today's schedule. I was up at 3:30 this morning to catch a 5 a.m. flight to be here by 8 so I could run Zoom calls with my team across the country, so I could record with you, so I could be on time for a partner meeting where we're delivering 2025 pricing to our third biggest partner right after this. Then to spend a few days or a few hours with my sales leadership team before the big happy hour tonight, right? So like a day like that, really atypical. But I still fit in a workout this morning. Like I architected it so I could get here on time before the one-on-ones to be able to get a 30-minute run in, which was enough for me to hit my day and to feel like I did something for myself. And I'd say, like, to rewind on your actual question, no day is the same anymore, which I think you and I probably both align on. I'm a proud husband, father of two, and I travel a ton for work. I'm probably 150,000 domestic miles a year and about 70 to 80 nights a year in hotels. And there are a few things that I just like have as like non-negotiables. Like one is I move every day. I ideally move in the morning because I believe you should do something for yourself before you do something for others. And I've chosen to have that be invisible time as much as possible, which means before my family is up so that it's not going to interrupt with breakfast and that morning routine, which is a big part of like energy for me in the mornings. And when it comes to work travel, sometimes that means a day like today, which is leaving really early to get it in here. And ultimately it's required like a ton of discipline around things like alcohol to make sure that I don't let the temptations on the road get in the way of the things that are going to make me feel the best and do the best. And I think a big fitness lesson that I've learned really came from marathon training, which is that a lot of people go to the well in their session. They work so hard that then it detracts from their long-term goals because they're so sore that they're out for 3 or 4 days and you actually lose progress. So I found a lot of, I'd say like joy, but also just like satisfaction in small wins every day versus needing to run 10 miles. Today it was 3 miles in 35 minutes. That felt fine. And I'll be ready to go again tomorrow versus killing myself and then being out for a week and you actually probably lose fitness in that recipe. So for me, progress, forward momentum is way more important than like going to the well.
So for people that are listening, I follow you on Instagram and we follow each other. And every time I go to like a Instagram profile of some fitness person or some business person, I always see followed by Mike Wolber. Mm-hmm. And I have personally taken a bunch of inspiration. I feel like I don't have a single mentor. The internet is my mentor. And I construct that by, if I want to like have the right mindset, it'll be like a David Goggins type character. If I want fitness or balance, it'll be like a Sahil Bloom kind of person. Like, who are your like if you were to design like a board of like 3 to 5 heroes that inspire you in some way, like who would be on that board?
I do have a mentor, and I feel like every chapter of my like life, my mentor has changed because I believe your mentor should be someone you're chasing that you don't think you can catch, but you ultimately do catch when you're like doing the things. And once you do, you have to like level up your mentor network. So I do have a mentor today, but I also do consume a lot similar to you because I do believe that like maximal inputs, as long as they're like positive inputs, can really help you show up differently at work or at home because they inspire creativity or they can get you through a hard day or whatever. But I would say it would be like three profiles that would be like most interesting to me. One would be someone who shows up like for their family and shows up with balance at home, because I think it's really easy in this like charging career to have your work identity become more important than your identity at home. And to me, like I chose to get married a decade ago. Like I chose to have a family with my wife, April. My whole left arm is a sleeve of like Bend, Oregon, anchored into my like love for my family. So finding people that have found balance and being successful on both sides, but showing up for the things that matter is super important to me. The second like persona would be that persona. And I would say to answer that would be like Jesse Isler. I think he does a good job demonstrating that. Someone who is on a freaking private jet every day, but he'll do day trips to be back for the football game and things like that. He could easily make it an overnight, but he doesn't. And that really inspires me to make travel hard on the body so it's easier on my family, even though I know this career is really hard, like on my home life. The second would be, I love people that do hard things for the sake of doing hard things. Because I think when you do things that are hard, you just realize that like the glass ceiling in life is real and like it's up to you to break it, whether it's your career, whether it's your weight, whether it's how you think about a podcast. Mine's got 30,000 downloads. We just met a dude with 4 million, right?
Incredible.
Like now I'm fired up on a whole new level, but like My wife hates the language, but David Goggins would definitely be someone who just like will get on the bike and ride for 6 hours, or he'll make you do 100 pull-ups. And once you do it, you have to do it again, right? And I think that like outwork mentality really resonates with me. And then like closer to my personal life, there's someone named Patrick Davidson who was our COO, but really our acting CRO for like the prime years of G5's growth. And I learned so much about what it means to show up and to be intentional at work. And working with Patrick Davidson for about 4 years at G5 to this day, like mentor, talk to him often, but learned a lot about all of those things through PD. And Patrick would definitely be someone I have to put in that top 3.
I love what you said about doing hard things. I was having a conversation last week about this with some team members, and I totally resonate with that. I think the way I've kind of like mechanized it in my mind is after listening to a podcast with actually David Goggins and Huberman. Andrew Huberman talks about the idea of like the anterior mid-cingulate cortex, which is the part of the brain that actually grows when you do hard things, right? And I often find myself in very similar positions where even if you think about like being consistent as a hard thing, which in my mind it is, right?
Yep.
Out of every 3 days, there's one day where you're just absolutely fired up and you're like, yeah, this is easy. There's another day where you're like, okay, like this is like kind of easy and there's some resistance and some friction, but I can go to the gym, I can do whatever. And then there's that third day that really is not fun and you're not feeling good and you traveled and you didn't sleep. And I feel like the frontier and the opportunity is all in that third day, right? Whereas if you actually strip away everything else and just focus on that third day, that's where like everything comes. Because the way I see it is like there's a frontier and that third day is allowing you to like break through that frontier and inch forward. And the goal is almost like, how do you identify that? It's almost like, you know, I was listening to Sal Bloom, like the idea behind growth is like, just make a list of everything you don't want to do and then do that week over week. And that'll be the way you like break out of comfort.
Yep. Well, and I think like there are so many moments in my career where I can reflect back where I didn't want to do something and I didn't for a really long time because of fear or the unknown or imposter syndrome or like all the things. And when I finally did it and I realized that it was possible to do that thing, that's when it got really good. And what I've also realized, like, and it's probably more on the fitness front, but I firmly believe that it bleeds into how I show up at work. Like I've raced almost 10 Ironmans. I've qualified for Boston Marathon. I lost 75 pounds from like the peak down to the floor of like weight loss. And I don't get a chance to like talk about that a lot organically at work. But in my back pocket, I know that I've done these things. So when I'm posed with like this big challenge of like growing a business or, you know, getting a big recruit, like I freaking love hiring or like whatever it might be, there's just this like calm confidence I now have because I've done the hard things. And there's just something about that I firmly believe like just transcends in how you can show up at work. And the coolest thing about this in like the world of fitness is that fitness is big enough that no matter what your like current capability is, there's room for all of us to be in it together, which I also love because when doing hard is relative. So my version of hard will be different than yours, even though I bet we could push each other pretty like well in the gym. But I'm at a gym right now called The House in Bend, and people of all shapes and sizes are in there going to the well every day, probably 5 times harder than they would in their home gym. And there's just something about that makes me believe that those people show up with that much more in their home life, their work life, whatever.
Totally. So I had a conversation a couple of weeks ago with a bunch of my founder friends. And if you look at most of the activation energy that is needed to do something hard, take a big career risk, whatever, sometimes it can be construed that it's driven from like insecurity, right? When you listen to one of my favorite podcasts is a podcast called Founders. And it's this guy, David Senra, who reads a biography a week, records an episode on that biography. And what's so cool is that he's read hundreds of biographies and he's able to create a mental map of like Steve Jobs did this when he was, 35. It was really weird to see how Bill Gates took a completely different approach. And there's so much nuance there, right? One of the things he talks about is how most of the people that do these incredible things are driven from insecurity. What is your thought on insecurity as a driver?
I'm incredibly insecure. Talk about it a lot at work too. I think insecurity can show up in 2 different ways at work or at home. I think especially at home, like my wife sees like kind of both sides of it. Insecurity can show up in a way that is fearful and that is full of doubt and that makes you feel like you have to get constant like reassurance from someone. Like words of affirmation is a huge part of my love language, both at work and at home. And I think that can drain people around me personally, because I need almost like this like high five energy to know that I'm doing the right things, that we're making the right progress. And that's like totally an insecurity that is like more of like the negative side of it, I think, and how I show up both at home and at work. But I also think there's like a humility that comes with it, whether you think about like imposter syndrome. Do I really deserve to be like behind the mic right now with Shiv? Do I have enough to like say? Or do I deserve to be on stage? Or do I deserve to have this like huge title with this huge responsibility department list right now? And I think there's something about that on like the positive front that means I show up every day wanting to earn my chair because of that insecurity. And I really try to channel that version of the energy, because I do think there is like a total positive in it, which is that like I don't deserve to be here. I have to work to be here. And I think that outwork, showing up to like earn it every day, not feeling entitled, I think there's a lot of good that can come from an insecurity. And I don't want to be like overly caffeinated, even though I am, but the best speech I've ever listened to was actually Matthew McConaughey accepting an Oscar in 2014. And he says that there's 3 people that we need in our life. We need someone to chase, we need someone to look forward to, and we need someone to look up to. And I love that like reframe, because I'm sure someone like that's rooted in insecurity just like we are, but he's turned it into this like forward thinking, like kind of what's he looking forward to, his why. And I try to think about that more, because I could get like totally fixated on the insecurity side of me. But I try to think about that, like, why am I doing what I'm doing? Am I chasing? Am I always moving forward? Just as like a quick aside.
Thing that I find challenging, by the way, I also consider myself insecure,
Yep.
right? And I think there are things that, you know, even I was chatting with Jennifer yesterday, when I'm not working, there's a guilt associated with it. And I find it an incredible driver, and there's things that you can take from it. How do you balance the need to, because when I'm content, usually I'm secure, right? I'm at peace. And I find it hard to balance like being insecure and also being at peace and like being content with what you have. How do you think about that dynamic?
Probably like the worst person to answer this question. And I mean, I think about it a lot, and I think it boils down to discipline in like a huge way, because I too like struggle with like this like guilty conscience or this guilty mindset. Like if I'm not being super responsive to my team on Slack because I'm traveling or I'm at the gym or whatever, or if I'm missing out on Nathan's first swim practice yesterday because I really had to get a couple things done for work, or if I'm missing out on work because I chose to focus on family, there's just always this like what if kind of guilty type thing. And I actually kind of like vented about this with our CEO last week, and he responded in such a like stoic way. He's like, Mike, just be more disciplined. And I was like, well, that's not enough. Like I need more, like tell me more. Right. And he's like, take longer to respond to people and like make that normal. Like, cause it's really important to you that you're focusing on your family and your fitness, because you're traveling every week for the next 13 weeks for this business. Like you got to be disciplined, or like have the discipline to cancel the trip because you know you're 1 week out from burnout, and like have the discipline to know that. So I think there is a lot to be said about challenging yourself to find content, but also challenging yourself to just like be where your feet are. And that's something that I'm not great at, but I just challenge myself often. Like when I'm here, let my phone just be on silence. Like don't deal with like the phantom vibrations. I know my phone can't vibrate right now. That helps. But I'm constantly trying to figure out the right systems and discipline to be able to enjoy the moment and to not think about the climb, because I have climbed like crazy in my career, and it's easy for that to be all I think about. And I never enjoy all of the success. And I think that could be a huge regret if I don't find the right ways to like balance that out.
How do you think about regret? Like, what is your view on regret?
I probably don't think about it often, which probably shows like how I operate around like regret. I've got one life, and I'm trying to make as many great decisions as I possibly can. And I probably learned the most like wisdom around this while at Rent Dynamics. Our founder was incredibly steady, and he was incredibly consistent. And he always said, like, there's nothing wrong with scraping your knees when it comes to like life or how you show up at work. Just don't scrape your knees the same way twice. And I think that's probably how I feel about regret. Like, as long as I don't scrape my knees the same way twice, it's not worth regretting it. But if I do it twice, there's probably a little bit of pause. Like, why did I do that thing twice when I already learned the lesson the first time? So I'd say I'm probably trying to live a life that's full of failure and full of forward momentum, but like really minimized on making that same mistake more than once. And I think if there's an outcome there that's like relatively in line with that, which I think is a reality, staying loyal to my wife and doing the right thing at work and being there for the moments that matter. And when I mess up, like knowing that like as long as it's only once and there's an iteration, not worth looking back. I think we lose more than we win there.
I've taken inspiration from you with my bookshelf. So you posted on LinkedIn about color coding your bookshelf, and
sure.
I decided to do the same thing. And I also know we have a bunch of similar books. How do you think about reading as a concept, and like what has inspired you there?
Yeah, so when I worked at Nike, I was there for just under 5 years. Nike, one of the like core values in the business is be a sponge. And it didn't mean much to me then, but it means a lot to me now. I feel like we always have an opportunity to like thirst for knowledge and to just be learning. It bleeds into like one of my big recruiting principles now, which is like coachability is like far and away the most important thing on a team, which like I have a pretty strict definition on. But I read a ton. And to be candid, I don't finish a lot of the books that I start. I tend to like read some, listen to some on the podcast, but I like am constantly trying to consume something for a few reasons. Like a few years back when I first got like a C in front of my title, I was super nervous. Early stage company. It was 2020, so I was like 33 years old. And it was like, crap, am I really ready to like command this business, even though it's a small business, as a chief revenue officer? So I reached out to my mentor. And like of all the things he told me to do, he was like, buy HBR and read HBR, because every executive in your role is in the exact same state of like imposter syndrome. And that's what they're reading to like learn what to say, how to say it, and just be able to recite that stuff. And that will help you with command and control. You also have to like learn and like go do the thing. But ever since 2020, I just got like addicted to like consuming so that I could reference material. Right now I'm reading Lencioni. I love his books. Patrick in general, I find to be someone that's like highly referenceable, highly quotable, and highly relatable. And right now I'm actually rereading The Advantage, just like rethinking kind of all of the operating principles for our sales leadership team that we're making some iterations to as we step into next year. And I think, getting ready for this offsite we're doing this afternoon, the overarching premise of disagree and commit is so powerful. And I think it's easy to say, yes, we do that at work, but you probably don't. Like, do you really disagree like crazy behind closed doors, but then walk out into the eye of the business like radically aligned? I think the premise from The Advantage like really rings true to me, and like going to the well in that right now.
What does relaxed intensity mean to you?
Oh man, you're like the first person who's actually asked me to talk about that a lot. Relaxed intensity is showing up with an intensity that's palpable. You talked about like kind of trying to find this like intense, like maybe like persona at work or whatever it might be, but it's showing up with an intensity that people can see and they can feel, but also that makes people still want to be around you and has a spirit of like inclusiveness and belonging, and does not say like, if you can't match my intensity, you can't be in the room. I know a lot of people that show up with a bias for intensity and they don't listen. And that does not pull people in when you don't listen. When you're so angry, you're so fired up about your gap to quota for the month or for the quarter that it just like pushes people away. A relaxed intensity says, there's a number and we're way off pace. This is the team to do it. How do we get there? And I think like one of the big things that bleeds into what I believe the definition of relaxed intensity for is the ability to have command and control when you're in a situation, to be able to acknowledge when you don't, and to know like what the right direction is for the team, and to have the right aura about you that makes people want to be part of that team, versus an unnecessary intensity that makes people not want to talk to you because you're not in the space to listen. And I think finding the balance between relaxation at work and intensity, that's kind of become the word I use to define it.
What was 2010 Mike, who was working at Nike, like versus 2024 Mike, who is the CRO of a big company?
2010 Mike thought it was cool when his t-shirt matched his sneakers and didn't necessarily realize that it was important to be accountable at work. And 2010 Mike was pretty similar to 2015 Mike, and that was like happy to be like along for the ride. And I have moments of like awesome. If I look back at the first 5 years of my career, the way that I got the job at Nike was pretty badass. The way that I got promoted after 3 months was pretty badass. But the way I showed up at work for 5 years was really reflective of I think, why I ultimately decided to leave Nike, which is I got comfortable being part of the ride, not being the ride. I think I got to a point where I like saw people around me doing things that I thought were cooler than what I was doing, or on stage when I thought I should be on stage. And I like realized that I wasn't doing the work to get on stage, and like literally speaking, not figuratively, because at Nike, you want to be the person on stage presenting the product. And in 2015, the day that I resigned, my manager was going to put me on a PIP. Like that's how like disconnected I was from like the work. But it was also like the rebirth of like what the last 10 years have been, which have been like beyond my wildest dreams. But I would say it was less intentional and more just being a participant in my career versus being the like absolute owner of my career, which is what changed in 2015.
What about early 2000s, Mike? What was he thinking? What was he like?
Early 2000s, Mike, I've always been empathetic. Like I've always cared deeply about how other people feel. I've always craved, adventure. As a kid, like kind of think like high school, I was always craving, like kind of throttling, like just about to break the rules, but not quite. Like I'm a good kid at the end, like at my core, but like if curfew's 11, I'm getting home at 11:05, like just enough to like push it. Craved adventure, have a huge adrenaline mindset, snowboarded 100 plus times a year all through high school. But I've always craved independence. Like as early as 2000, I started a car washing business with my brother, a landscaping business with my brother. There's always been this like balance between what probably they first called me when I was born. There was so much hair in my face, they had to comb it out. And they called me like a little man, like from like the day I was born. And there's always been this persona around me that's been, I'm a few years ahead of my peers from an age standpoint and how I show up. And that's kind of always been part of my like aura for sure.
Were you bullied as a kid?
A little bit. I have one really cool memory, probably like the only like vivid bully memory. 2002 or 2003, I'm early high school. And do you remember like junking? Yeah. The silliest thing ever. But like, I don't know why that like is a thing. But like, anyways, I'm in a circle after school for some reason in the hallway. This Christian school I went to called Grace. And it's me, my buddy Ross, my buddy Alex, and this big guy named Mike. And I was Michael at the time. I was not Mike until 2015. And Mike junks me to pick on me. Like it was totally just like picking on me, but thinking it's funny or whatever else. My buddy Ross slams this guy in the face, throws him on the ground, swears at him and says, if you ever do that again, and he threatens him. And it was like the only time I remember like a public display of like bully, but also like a public display of like protection. And it was like the coolest moment ever because like we didn't say anything. We just like left. And it was like, man, these guys got my back. And like it really kind of changed my perspective on like friendship and like contributing to friendships. Again, not just being a participant in friendships. But that's probably like the only vivid memory I have. But I definitely have memories as a kid of struggling with some of those things.
What was your relationship like with your siblings growing up?
So kind of interesting. My brother Caleb, he is 34, I'm 36. And the older we've gotten, the closer we've gotten. Early elementary, high school, classic like feuding, debating, arguing over the TV show, but like plenty of micro moments of like together time. And like, because we went through divorce together, we always had this like solidarity that was unspoken. Like I had his back, he had mine. Me and Caleb like wildly close. And the older we got, the more aligned we got too. Like he followed me to college. I got him a job at Nike. Like a lot about our life kind of paralleled, even though we're now doing very different things for work, but we are both in sales. My sister is 10 years younger and we have a different dad. My stepdad, who I've only called my father. So we're like half siblings. 10 years is a big gap. And so like we have a different relationship. I love my sister. Her name's Bridget like crazy, but we didn't have the proximity we had because when I was 12, she was 2. So there was like a very different, like almost like protective love for my sister that I've always felt. But the older we've gotten, the closer we've gotten. But now that we're in different states, it's much more of a like arm's distance in proximity. But anytime we pick up the phone or are together in person, we pick up right where we left off. But the age gap is definitely real in the sibling dynamic.
Has that changed over time, your relationship with her?
Yeah, I mean, it's gotten closer, but it's also gotten obvious that it's like it needs to be intentional because she's in Alaska. She's a flight attendant on Alaska Airlines. She travels like crazy. She's young, married with no kids, so she can be footloose, fancy free. And I'm like a dad and accountable to this big team at Apartment List. And we both have to be really intentional to stay connected, or we can go months without even talking to each other. So we're constantly trying to remind each other of that. And like the recent thing we did is we shared each other's locations, because now that I'm back in Bend, I'm flying Alaska a lot more. And we're just like hoping that one of these days we're going to both be in like SeaTac at the same time. Yeah. And that selfie will like break the internet. So we're definitely like always trying to find ways to like stay connected and stay close.
If you were to empty all your responsibilities out, how would you restack priorities in your life?
Yeah, actually, it's like a really hard question to answer. I would probably answer it the same way that I like try to live today, but I know it doesn't always show up to like the people around me. April would be first. I picked her first. I picked her before my kids. I picked her before my career. We've been together for 14 years, and none of our success would have happened without April. And to this day, she brings me the most like happiness, energy, joy. And if there's one person I want to hang out with today, it's like April, just the two of us. And I would stack rank April like at the very top. Close second, I would order my kids. I think Nathan and Quinn are in this like era where they think their parents are awesome. And I know that era goes away. And it's hard, but also amazing right now because they get really sad when dad travels, and I travel a lot for work. And so stack ranking with them like right behind April would be like incredibly obvious to me, but also super intentional. And I think the third would be like community. Like we were just super intentional about moving back to Bend, and we feel like it was like kind of like a homecoming for us. And you have to be intentional about connecting with people around you in your community, or else your community doesn't see you as like a positive member of it. You're, taking, but you're not giving. And I think being a positive member of the community you want to be in is super important. I'd say the fourth thing would be continuing to make like my relationship with fitness like a priority, and how I show up, because it gives me a ton of energy and joy. And like the fifth is, even if I could empty my whole life of it, I would still find a way to like work, because work gives me so much energy, joy, and just like excitement and drive that it's like really, really hard to explain. Like I would still find a way to work.
Would you ever reinvent yourself in a different career or a different role,
Maybe. I feel like I did it once and it worked so well. In 2015, I went from Michael Wolber to Mike Wolber, which doesn't sound like a big deal, but it was a huge deal to my mom. Cause like to this day, when she calls, she'll leave me a voicemail like, cause it says Mike. She'll be like, your name's not Mike, it's Michael. Like she still to this day says that. But I felt like, I made this like massive pivot from product to sales, from massive Fortune 100 to like growth stage startup, to variable compensation, taking total control of my comp. And I've more than 7x what I was making in a 10-year depressed window. So I feel like I did it once, and I happened to choose vertical SaaS, where now I've built a brand for myself that I think is worth way more than my paycheck. So I'd like to say that the answer is yes, but it would be less significant is like the last reinvention. It would be doubling down on me and going solo for like the next iteration, which there will definitely be a go solo iteration of my career. Okay. But right now I'm in the like, I want to build a team. I want to be on a team, and I want to help our business have a great outcome. But there will definitely be a next chapter, which will be like, what's Mike going to do without the W-2?
Wow. I'm excited for that.
It'll be a studio like this, man.
What's your fitness routine like right now?
Okay, so right now it is very different than it used to be. When I left Bend to join Rent Dynamics, I weighed about $180. Right now I'm like 205. I was running like 40 to 60 miles a week, and as a byproduct could kind of eat like whatever I wanted to. And I've never been as disciplined with diet as I've been with like fitness and training. When I shifted to Rent Dynamics, I went all in on that business. And I think that's when a lot of people got to know me publicly, because that's when like the LinkedIn version of myself was born. Again, like really intentional milestone for me. And as a byproduct, I stack ranked family, then work, then fitness. And fitness was like a distant 3. And so my fitness relationship over the last 4 years has probably gotten like the best that it's ever gotten. And that my identity is not attached to what I did at the gym or what I didn't do at the gym. But it's also forced me to get a lot more disciplined with how I eat, because I'm not working out with the same like volume. So I'm a lot more disciplined now when it comes to like my diet and nutrition decisions. But right now I train about 6 days a week. And I'd say 60% of my training right now is like high energy, high intensity weightlifting. And then the other 40% is cardio. And about half of that is like slow and low with my dog, zone 1, zone 2, hiking with I ruck with like a weight vest. And then I try to run 2 or 3 days a week as well. And I joined the coolest gym ever called The House. That's like CrossFit without the bad version of CrossFit. So I'm just pushing it to like a level 12 a couple days a week, which has been a huge way to build community back home.
What is training for an Ironman look like?
There's two types of amateur athlete answers to this. One would be the people that just want to finish. They're like the completers, and there's nothing wrong with being a completer. That is a huge feat. And then there are people that are like trying to compete, whether it's to place for a specific time. And this like addictive kind of like all-in personality that I have always pushed me down the path of wanting to be like a competitor. And so when I was at like my peak, which was pre-kids, 2016 was the best time I ever had in the distance. 19 to 22 hours a week of training. And that's active training time. That's not commuting. That's not rehab and therapy. And you think about it representative of the time you spend on the race. So it's a 2.4 mile swim. It's a 112 mile bike, and then it's a marathon. So 26.2. And if done well, you're spending 50% of your time on the bike for a race. So 50% of your time's training. So 8 to 11 hours a week on the bike, probably anywhere from 120 to 240 miles a week of cycling. You're spending only about 20% of the race time, maybe even 10% of the race time swimming. But swimming is a sport that requires frequency. That is not a volume sport, meaning you can't just swim 2 days a week and be good. You have to touch the water often. So I would typically stack a swim either before or after other workouts to make sure I touched the water 5 to 6 days a week, because it's just such a sport of form. And then I would run an additional 30 to 40% of the time, anywhere from 30 miles on a low week, 60 miles to a high week, and ate absolutely everything. It was amazing. It was amazing.
That's awesome. I feel like the hardest part of fitness for me is nutrition.
Yep.
Because that's the thing that's like unrelenting. Every minute, every hour of the day, you have to make a decision. Do I not eat that donut, or do I eat that donut? Do I order the salad, or do I order the cheeseburger? And it's so hard because like the gym is hard, but you do it one time a day or 5 times a week, and you make that decision once.
Yep.
But the nutrition is like, especially for us who probably have a predisposed inclination for food, like you definitely make that decision constantly, and it's definitely challenging.
It's challenging, and it's also challenging when you take any type of like high intensity fitness of any spectrum, whether it's weightlifting and you're going for a weight goal, or you take like high intensity like endurance or whatever it might be. You couple that with work, which is like so mentally like stimulating and things like that. And you have to find this balance of like making the right decision, not just choosing quantity, but choosing quality, but also finding like right ways to like stay on top of it. Because for me, like at least, it's really easy for me to forget to eat at work. And if I forget to eat at work and I've trained 4 or 5 hours that day already, and it's 5 o'clock and I'm going home, I'm bringing home a terrible version of Mike. To like what I just said was like the most important person. So like finding the way to like balance all that to me is still like, I have no idea. I do my best, but it's hard to find the right balance.
A couple months ago, or I don't know when I saw this, you posted a picture about like a wedding picture that went viral. What is that story?
We got married in 2014. Can I tell you like the medium version of the story?
Sure.
So I'll talk a little bit faster. So in 2013, I proposed to my wife, and we'd broken up twice while dating. I'm a few years younger than her, and I just was like lower on the maturity curve and just not ready. Classic like young guy thing. But we're together, we're serious, we were back together. And the backstory is that the year before in 2012, April really wanted to do Christmas photos. She wanted to do a card together. And I was a jerk. And I said, I don't want to do Christmas cards until we're married, which like really hurt her feelings. And that was like my opinion, whatever. So the next year, I'm like, April, want to go do some Christmas card photos? And she's like, no, not until we're married. So my plan was to set a camera up. I had an SLR and flip it to record versus photo. And I'd get like our proposal on camera. She didn't want to do the photos. So we're driving home from Bend, where we'd been for the weekend at my parents' condo. She's driving behind me because we lived separately. And I pull over onto the side of the road because I had to propose to this girl. So we're on the side of the road, Thanksgiving weekend. She doesn't get out of the car because she thinks I'm gonna like go pee or go to the bathroom or something. So I'm like waving to her to get her out. And finally she gets out. She's like, what's going on? And I just like got on my knee, proposed, no plan. But the coolest thing happened. We're driving home from Bend. Thousands of people are driving home to Portland as well, honking and celebrating for us while they watch us like celebrate on the side of the road. So that's like the backstory. And the reason I tell you that is that's how Bend became so important to us. We dated there. We got engaged there. Bend has always been really important to me in April. So we did a destination wedding. So the next year, June, we're getting married. We invite 150 people. They almost all showed up. And we planned a really cool wedding at this rustic venue just outside of the city. And a few hours before the ceremony was going to start, a wildfire broke. And it was human related or human caused. And the fast version from here on is that I'm standing at the altar with our officiant and both the bridal parties. And as April and her father, Stuart, are getting ready to walk down the aisle, a fire ranger rolls up with the sirens on, gets out of his car and says, "Stop, you guys got to get out of here." And I'm at the altar. Music is playing. Like, it is go time. And our event coordinator, planner, a friend of ours named Stacy, runs up there and gets them to basically agree to a condensed, like 5 tight minute ceremony. Go fast, and you guys got to hightail it. So April and Stuart roll up. We get married, give her a kiss, and then we announce we have to move. So everyone loads up their trucks with all the food and all the tables. And on the way to this park we picked randomly in the center of town, our photographer says, "Let's go get an awesome photo." And the smoke is like next level. It's 6 miles away from us at this point. So we park on this cool rolling hill called Tethero, and we get a couple cool photos. And this is right after Facebook had acquired Instagram. So when you post on Instagram, it automatically would post to Facebook and vice versa. So you post this picture. It's pretty cool. You've seen the photo. The next morning we wake up, thousands of reposts, 1.5 million likes on Instagram.
Wow.
NBC's hitting us up for a local news interview, which we do before going to Mexico. And ultimately that got picked up by every media outlet you can imagine. We were featured on Ellen, Jimmy Fallon. We were the #1 ranked article on BuzzFeed in 2014.
Wow. That is insane.
Wild. So, and it was cool because we moved to Bend about a year later and joined a digital marketing firm. And so, like, the dumbest joke ever that I still tell from time to time is that I have really good SEO and I understand SEO super well now because of that like virality moment that we had. And the craziest thing of all is we're at a hibachi grill in Mexico for our honeymoon about a week later. And this couple goes, "Do you guys hear about that wildfire couple?"
No way.
And it was just like, that's how big it was. It was
That
like
is so
topic
cool.
of conversation.
And did you say anything to
Oh
them?
yeah, we just like rode that wave. The only regret I have, not only, because we just talked about regret, is I didn't monetize it. Like, this version of me would have made a ton of money on that. Like, would have found a ton of ways, whether it was media and all the different things, but we didn't make a buck. We had a few vendors that like discounted and things like that.
Yeah.
But no money made off of that, which
money
people always ask.
I love that. Awesome. What do people not know about Mike? What have you not talked about? What's the side of Mike that people don't know about?
Probably the side of Mike that a lot of people don't show, because I think I show up with a lot of like energy, courage, gumption, confidence, all the things you see online, which are like real. Like that's like the real version of me. I'm a pretty fragile, empathetic dude. Like, and whether you believe that into like insecurity or just like kind of the nature of like, I think how I was raised and like kind of feeling broken as an early kid with like, you know, kind of a separated family, and then like what it felt like to be chosen again. I take things really personal, and I struggle with that. Like the like taking things personal. Every day I have to give myself some sort of a pep talk before the first Zoom call to make sure that I show up with like the right level of energy, the right level of intensity, and that when things don't go my way, which every day they don't go my way, that I like can ride that and be a little bit more durable. Like, being durable in my career is not natural to me. And I think that's like a superpower, like the things that because I care deeply. But I also think there's like areas in my life that probably shows up bad more on like the guilt side that we talked about earlier. But I'd say like the empath side of me, a lot of people don't realize, Mike, that like Mike is a softie.
You mentioned that you met April 14 years ago.
Yeah, 2010.
2010. Been married for 12 years, you said?
It was 10 this past June.
10 years. People, at least my age, mid-20s, late 20s, they struggle with is like meeting somebody when you're just like prioritizing work. Like what was that? How did you meet April? And like what advice do you give for people that like are in that stage of life to try to make the most important decision that you will make, which is finding somebody?
It's probably like the worst advice ever, because I wasn't ready to meet April. I wasn't looking for April. I was 21. She was 29 when we met. And she was dating someone when we met. And there's a whole story about how we made it work. And I convinced her to date me, even though she was dating someone else. And I would say, like, the honest answer, at least for me, is that I found someone that was so designed for me in terms of personality and interests, and like genuinely made me feel full. And I'd never felt that with anyone before. I'd had girlfriends, but they were always like a nice to have. April was the first person I ever met that was like a need to have. And I think from the onset, like my first interaction with April, we weren't even talking. She was presenting in a team meeting. We were on the same team at work. And her smile, her energy, her ability to like command a room, I was like so taken with that. And it was also like someone I wanted to be. Like, she was emulating a lot of the things that I wanted to have one day in my career, because I'm like first week blacked out at Nike, just trying to like figure it out. And here she is like crushing this like huge team of analysts, like how to all this stuff. I knew when I met April, like, and I think April knew too. And it just took time to like have it work. But at the end of the day, there was a ton of intention that went into like courting one another and like getting to know one another. So I will say that, as much as it sounds cliche to say like when you know, or like things like that, no part of our relationship just happened. You know, I broke up with her twice because I was insecure and not ready for the next step, whatever that looks like. So there was a ton of intention, desire, and pursuit from both of us. It was not just me. We definitely pursued each other. But when I met April, I knew. And I think she knew too.
Awesome. And just going back to kind of learnings, right? From 2010 or from the Nike days, like what has been your biggest learnings as like a manager or as a leader in how to operate and how to conduct yourself?
I think if I reflect back on Nike, there were a couple learnings from Nike that I've definitely carried into my career, and the applications have evolved as I've graduated from an IC to a senior IC to a manager to now a second or third line like executive leader for, you know, a big business. When I first joined Nike, the job I got sucked. I really did not like it. It was black and white data entry. And I really wanted to get out of that job quickly. It was really just genuinely boring. It was literally copying and pasting an Excel doc into MS-DOS. They told me you have to do this in order to get promoted. And I did this. And I got promoted in 3 months. And it was a year as like the expectation they told me. And I don't think you should show up at work with like the attitude of competition with your peers or the people around you. But like the unpopular reality at work is you are competing. You're competing for your manager's attention, for business results. And if you're aligned to revenue or go to market, you fortunately or unfortunately, you're in like the most measurable sport in business. So I've like really leaned into that in my career, especially since reinventing myself on the sales side in 2015. And I think showing up with like the right level of energy and intensity, but also competition at work has really helped. And that it's been able to help me graduate, but also have this like coachability mindset that I had at Nike that I still have today. But to answer your question, like the manager front, I have learned something from every manager I've ever had. And I've had some crappy managers and I've had some amazing managers. And I think trying to figure out the right way to show up for your team and to show up with the right level of connectivity. I think a lot about like tactical relevance for a team. I always just like lacked respect for managers that couldn't flex on me to at least a degree. And like, can you really do this job? Or are you just like a dashboard manager that's like approving my PTO? That's probably like a young gun like attitude. But now it's like I travel more than anyone on our sales team. And like I find that really important, because if I'm asking the team to go to the well, like I'll be in the well with you. And I think this generation, like elder millennials that I'm a part of, really react well to that. But it's got to be balanced with, you know, command and control, the ability to still make the call. You're not people's friends. You are their leader. But tactical relevance is something that I really spend time on. And I think that's really helped me build the respect, trust, and loyalty of the teams around me, which has become a big part of what I think has made me successful.
Mike, I really respect you. I really admire you. I look up to you. Thank you for being on the show. Thank you for sharing. We talked about love. We talked about career. We talked about the infamous wedding story. And I'm just like so grateful to know you, because there's like so much that I either aspire to be or align myself with that I don't really find in a lot of people. candidly. And I think what's cool is like, because you're interested in so many things, because you're constantly getting better and striving to be better at work, to be better at fitness, to be better at, as a dad, as a husband, is just so inspiring to me, and I really value you. So
Really
thank you.
appreciate that, man. This will most likely be the most well-produced content series in multifamily. It's a privilege to be here, and I think it's important that we have people in our circles, and there's a select few that like we can really use to like challenge or find inspiration. And I firmly believe that iron sharpens iron, and I definitely get that from you too. So I appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you.